April 5, 1531. The sky dawned gray over London, as if nature itself sensed the horror about to unfold. A crowd gathered at Smithfield, the customary site for executions and cattle fairs. Today, however, something different awaited them. In the center of the square, an enormous bronze cauldron rested atop a freshly lit fire. The flames crackled as the water began to heat. A murmur rippled through the crowd when guards brought forth a bound man. His name was Richard Roose, a cook in the service of Bishop John Fisher. His pale face revealed the terror he felt, contemplating the instrument of his death. In moments, he would face an execution as rare as it was brutal. He would be boiled alive, feeling every inch of his skin slowly dissolve in boiling water. How did a simple cook end up condemned to such a terrible fate? To understand this macabre story, we must turn back the clock several weeks. February 1531. England was experiencing one of the most turbulent periods in its history. King Henry VIII was determined to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon to wed Anne Boleyn. This decision divided the kingdom. On one side stood ambitious courtiers who supported the king's desire, on the other, conservative clerics who considered marriage sacred and indissoluble. Among the latter was John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, one of the staunchest opponents of the royal divorce. Fisher, a man of deep religious convictions, had earned the enmity not only of Henry VIII but also of the Boleyn family, who saw him as an obstacle to their ambitions. The bishop lived in constant apprehension. He slept in different chambers each night and took extraordinary precautions with his food and drink, fearing an attempt on his life. His paranoia, as we shall see, was not unjustified. At the episcopal residence in Lambeth, south of London, Bishop Fisher maintained a staff of servants, including Richard Roose, his cook. Roose was not particularly remarkable, an ordinary middle-aged man with no distinguishing features that set him apart from the mass of servants who kept the great houses functioning. Discreet and efficient, he had never given reason for suspicion. Until that fateful February 18th. That afternoon, Fisher hosted a meal for guests. The menu included a thick soup, common in the English diet of the time. Roose prepared the broth as usual, but secretly added a powder to the food. Later, he would claim he did it as a joke, believing it to be merely a medicine that would cause stomach pain, a mean trick but not deadly. According to his version of events, the bishop, however, ate little of the soup, not from suspicion, but perhaps from lack of hunger. Other guests consumed larger portions. At the end of the meal, the leftover food was given, as was normal, to beggars who had come asking for help. Among them were Bennet Kirwin and Alice Tryatt, two simple people who could hardly believe their luck at getting hot food from a bishop's kitchen. Hours later, the horror began. Extreme belly pain hit all who had eaten the soup, vomiting, cold sweats, shaking. Fisher survived, having eaten little of the poison. Others became very sick. Bennet and Alice, however, who had happily eaten their full portions, were not so lucky. Their bodies were found the next day, twisted in pain. News of the poisoning spread quickly. Henry VIII himself, upon hearing about the event, was furious. Even though Fisher was his political enemy, an attack like this was a danger to the king too. If bishops could be poisoned, then how could the king be safe? The ruler ordered an urgent check. Richard Roose was caught while trying to escape London. Taken to the Tower of London, he was put on the rack, a method of torture where the prisoner was tied to a cross-shaped frame, his arms and legs pulled almost to the breaking point. Under terrible pain, Roose admitted to adding the powder to the soup, but said he did not know it was deadly, thinking it was only a strong medicine to cause short-term pain. Strangely, the case did not follow regular law steps. On February 28th, Henry VIII came in person to Parliament to report the crime, something unusual for the time. The king called the poisoning an act of high betrayal, not just against Bishop Fisher, but against the king too. Parliament, always trying to keep the angry ruler happy, quickly passed the Act for Poisoning 22 Henry VIII Chapter 9, which named poisoning as high betrayal and set a new punishment for such crime: death by boiling. This point needs special notice. Henry VIII not only said Roose was guilty without a full trial, but also made a new law to punish him in a showy way. The normal punishment for betrayal was already horrible. The guilty one was pulled by horses, almost hanged, cut, and torn alive. But the king wanted something more, something that would equal to the horror of poisoning, a slow death in which the criminal would feel growing heat, feeling his body cook slowly. Why such cruelty? Why the king's personal role in a case that, although serious, involved only a cook and a bishop who was not even his friend? The reasons were never fully explained. Some writers say that Henry VIII had a true fear of poisoning, thinking it the most cowardly kind of death, not even fit for his enemies. Others, more doubtful, believe there were deeper political reasons. The foreign helper Eustace Shopweis, a trusted friend of Fisher and strong supporter of Queen Catherine, wrote in letters that the king acted with such force to remove any blame from himself, as he is too honorable to do such things, or at least to protect Lady Anne Boleyn and her father. This idea is not without support. Talk spread quickly after the poisoning, accusing the Boleyn family of hiring Roose to kill Fisher, one of the biggest blocks to Henry's wedding plans. The cook's quick and public killing could help stop any longer search that might pull in people close to the king. Whatever the truth, Richard Roose's end was fixed. His death was planned for April 5th. Such a rare event brought crowds to Smithfield. People pushed to see clearly. Street sellers moved among them, selling food and drinks, as if this were a stage show and not the cruel end of a person. The great bronze pot was already boiling when Roose was brought forward. Some say he was partly made sleepy with wine, a last act of kindness for one who would get no other. The guards took off his clothes and raised him above the pot. A short prayer was read by a priest, giving him forgiveness for sins, but no help for his body. What came next was one of the worst killings in English history. 3 times, Roose was dropped in the boiling water. On the first dip, only his legs went in. His cries filled the square, as the skin came off from the flesh. Some in the crowd passed out, others looked away, unable to watch. On the second dip, his body went in up to his chest. The water, which had been clear, turned light red as it ate away his skin. His screams were no longer human. They turned into unclear, choking sounds as he tried to breathe. On the third and last dip, Richard Roose was fully dropped into the boiling pot. Death, though terrible, at last ended his pain. Roose's death was not a one-time case. Because of the new law, others found guilty of poisoning would face the same end. In 1542, a woman named Margaret Davies was boiled alive at Smithfield for supposedly poisoning 3 homes where she worked. This method of killing was only officially ended during the rule of Edward VI, Henry VIII's son, as part of changes meant to limit the most cruel punishments. What makes Richard Roose's case truly upsetting is not just the violence of his death, but the political events around it. He was a victim of a wild time, when England stood at the edge of huge religious and political change. John Fisher, the man Roose reportedly tried to kill, would not avoid his own sad ending. 4 years after the event, in 1535, Fisher was killed for saying no to Henry VIII as the top leader of the Church of England. His head was shown on London Bridge until it rotted. Then it was replaced by the head of Thomas More, another person who met the same end. And Boleyn, whose path to the crown was linked to the Roose case, would also not have a happy end. In 1536, just 5 years later, she was killed for cheating, family crimes, and betraying the king, all mostly seen as made-up reasons so Henry could marry his third wife, Jane Seymour. As for Henry VIII, he ruled for 16 more years, married 4 more women, broke forever with Rome, and turned England into a Protestant country. His fear and harshness only grew with time, leaving behind a history full of blood that would always be part of England's story. Today, the place where Richard Roose died so badly is a busy shopping area, with no sign or statue to remember the horror that happened there. Few people walking through Smithfield each day know that under their feet, hundreds of years ago, a man was slowly boiled alive in a bronze pot. The story of Richard Roose shows us a shocking look into the past. It reminds us of a time when justice and cruelty walked side by side, when the powerful could change laws just to get what they wanted, and when a person's life could be judged by how useful their death was to politics. It is impossible to say today whether Roose was really guilty, or if he was blamed to hide a bigger plan or if he just made a sad mistake by adding unknown things to his boss's food. What we do know for sure is that his punishment was far worse than any fair justice, even by the harsh rules of that time. Killing someone by boiling, a death that repeats the very act of cooking. Roose's job carries a dark joke that cannot be missed. The man whose life was spent making food in big pots ended his days as part of one. It is a punishment that shows not just the removal of a criminal, but a terrible, poetic payback meant to satisfy the idea of payback justice in a more cruel time. 500 years have passed since that April day in Smithfield. The world has changed in ways that Henry VIII and people of his time could not imagine. Our justice systems, though not perfect, now try to help people improve more than punish. Our laws are said to apply the same to the rich and the poor. Our punishments, even for the worst crimes, do not include planned pain. Still, the story of Richard Roose, the man who was boiled alive, keeps people interested because it shows how small the line is between being fair and being cruel, and how offices that should protect people can easily turn into tools of fear when used by those in charge. Under the fast-moving feet of today's Londoners, the sounds of the past still live. And if we listen closely, maybe we can still hear the cries of a cook, who on a gray April day in 1531, learned in the worst way what it means to be on the other side of the pot.